There we go. Okay. Well, thanks for being here today. What I hope we do is have a conversation as much as we can. So I'm going to try to present some things, stop, get some feedback, and see what direction you want to go. Because I don't want to flip through a bunch of slides. I can definitely do that. So kind of the format roughly, I'm going to just give you a bit of an overview about what Innosphere Ventures does, just for context. Go do that pretty quick. And then first topic will be, we have a lot of data now, why companies don't make it, which is fantastic for you as starting a company. So I want to try to dig in a little bit to the data we know. What are the problems that companies see? And then we'll talk about fundraising. So that's kind of roughly the three topics. We can veer off in any direction you want. So fair game if you want to do that. So let me kind of start with a bit of an overview of Innosphere. So as Tasha said, I'm Mike Freeman, been in Innosphere about 10 years, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit technology incubator. That means we work with science and technology companies, mostly technical founders. We built some real estate, so we've done wet labs for biotech companies, and more recently have gotten last 5-6 years into venture capital, mainly trying to link all these things together. So we're working with great companies. We're housing some of them from a real estate perspective, investing in some. So that's the idea. So let's talk about a little about Innosphere. Just to give you a little bit of a trajectory here. The university is 100 years old. I saw that on campus today. So we're 25 years old. Most organizations that are not like the hub tied to university and funded by university that do accelerated incubator work typically make it about 3 to 5 years. Coincidentally, that's about when grants run out. So we've been doing this for quite a while. I think the main thing to know is day one, we saw this opportunity and need to support technical founders. And we have literally since day one not changed that mission. Kind of along the way, we've acquired or merged with 2 other nonprofits and kind of grown over time. So I won't spend a whole lot of time on this one. The trick behind Innosphere Ventures is trying to link together 3 things that are related, but sometimes aren't 100%. And that is running incubation commercialization programs, largely in life sciences, climate technology, energy, smart cities, that kind of thing. We do a lot of B2B SaaS, kind of cuts across. We don't run any SaaS programs per se, because we think, programs, at least in Colorado, like Techstars and other accelerators do a really good job in the B2B SaaS space. We kind of steer clear of that. Linking that real estate component, and mainly facilities that are unique to tech startups. So labs, kind of unique equipment. We're not office providers. We're not competing in the office space. And then I think really importantly now, venture capital. So learning from how to invest in companies has frankly made everything we're doing better over time. And so we're really committed to staying on the venture capital route. I will go through some venture capital trends, a little bit of data here in a minute, just to kind of orient you to that industry and what's going on. Won't kill you, hopefully, off with too much data, but I think a little bit is helpful. So that's kind of what we do. These are the verticals we support. If you're working in these industries, we probably can be a resource for you through the hub and tech transfer here at Texas Tech. We do run some long format programs, meaning about a year, for technical founders. We just launched a year or 2 of a 2-year program. The Department of Energy is funding, and Hard Tech Energy. 2 companies from Texas Tech are in that, which is great. And then we'll kick off a life sciences program, which is about a year long in April. And then I missed one in between, doing smart cities in between. So if you're in kind of the hard public sector, going after smart cities kinds of things, we'll run a program. We haven't done that one before. That's new for us this year. So those are the kind of the rough areas. When companies come to Innosphere, they're looking for any number of these things on this chart. I'd say overwhelmingly, the motivation from the founders was raising money, probably the number one thing. So when we start working with the companies, we go through an application process and screening. And main thing there is, we don't get thousands of applications like accelerators may, but we're really looking for overused term, but alignment between what we think we can provide to the company and the startup. So in other words, if a company comes in with false expectations of what they can do in industry, guess what? We failed. If we start working with them, nobody's going to be happy. So we spend a lot of time sort of in that matching process to really make sure we can help. Once a company comes into the program, the first 4-ish months is a pretty heavy immersion into the business challenges you're going to face. So we're not we have engineers and smart people on our team, PhDs. We can't help you with your product per se. We'll find people that can, but we're trying to help you with the business. Are you tackling the business aspects of the startup in kind of the right order, doing enough in each area? And success is almost always measured by 3 things. The ability to raise money. That could be through grants, by the way. We work with lots of technology out of universities and labs, federal labs. So we really encourage companies, frankly, to maximize the grant pathway. So that may be part of the support is getting into an SBIR process, or every state has different variations of startup grants these days. So we really help with those. And then ultimately into private capital. So not everybody's ready to do that day one, to say the least. If you're in a regulated industry, getting ready for a regulatory submission, mainly FDA in our case. Some cases in energy are regulated in different ways, but and then lastly, if most medical products, for example, you're not going to have a lot of revenue, and you're typically going to sell if you're valuable before you build a real sales team. So in every other industry support, sales, got to get and start selling. So it kind of depends on what industry you're in, but those are the metrics, right? Raise money, get traction commercially when you can, get ready for regulatory, and then along the way, guess what? You got to build a team. So those are the things we focus on. So I can go into any one of these topics, as we get into this, but that's the high level, what happens literally when you come in the program. So I'm going to dive into this one in a bunch more detail here in a minute. So here's the good news for being an entrepreneur, in this decade. There's a ton of data now out there, lots of good analytical studies, including this one. This is from a group called CB Insights. Every 2 years, they look at 200 tech companies that failed and try to get to the root cause of what happened and summarize that data. It's available publicly, by the way. Just search CB Insights and startup failure. So this is real information that we know what companies are getting challenged with on the business side. So that doesn't mean your product didn't get through FDA, by the way, that's not on this list, or hey, some regulatory agency didn't approve what I'm doing. All that technical risk certainly still exists. So I'm gonna run through these in a lot more detail in a minute, but what's interesting is if you look at this data over a handful of years, what's for as of 2021, the number one reason companies failed is they ran out of cash. I think that is absolutely a symptom of everything else, by the way. So that may be why a founder said that they failed. But I think when you peel that onion back, you're going to find a whole bunch of other things, and probably number 2 being number 1. So in this data, you flip-flop and between number 1 and number 2, I'm showing you here, between kind of running out of money or no market need. Now, things like the I-Corps program you can take advantage of here are absolutely how you work towards understanding the market need for sure. And I'll talk a little more specifically about some things there. The other ones that maybe are you probably would guess, but maybe not too obvious, outcompeted generally means that there were incumbents, meaning companies already out there, that startups thought they could just outright beat and couldn't. And also, the one that's really, really hard to deal with is if you launch a business and you're in relatively uncontested space, it is entirely possible that a large company or many companies could have the exact same idea you're working on, have been quietly developing behind the scenes, and there's been no publicity around it. Then all of a sudden you get a big company with a ton of expertise, engineering, marketing, sales, legal, finance, right, in your space. And so those are the kind of the dimensions of competition. Again, the one you cannot predict because you will not know what large companies are doing is the problem area. Competition, you should be able to identify and figure out who they are and can you beat them. That's the one you got to look out for mostly because that's what you can control for. And then lastly, flawed business model means that we didn't make money. especially in harder tech companies with products. This is very prevalent. And, you know, we see it all the time. Hey, we can make this, you know, at this volume for this amount of money. Well, who really knows if you can do that till you get there? And maybe you can't get to volume. Our product's so expensive, it just can't compete with other alternatives. So that's one of the big challenges. Software companies have a little bit more of an advantage because they're not producing the physical product. But oftentimes software companies have the exact same problem. They can't produce enough revenue, you know, per unit of their sales, even though theoretically it should be easier than a medical device company. So that's what that means in terms of business model. So, oh yeah, go ahead. Oh, and please interrupt. I mean, well, I mean, or ask questions, what I meant, because you're not interrupting. Yeah.
Which is, I believe, in the same town or city, actually, right? But with that type of obstacle, say for instance, everything's ready and it's going, and then you've got FDA or an in-rail type of hiccup, where often within the four in that matrix with that?
It's not going to fall in there. That's what I was saying. So that's a double whammy as a scientist, engineer, maybe I call you a product company for lack of a better word, not to say software is not a product, by the way, but you have all the technical risk embedded in what you're doing, regulatory being a big one, obviously, manufacturability. I mean, here's a great example. Medical device company we invest in our fund was just about to start their FDA approval process. And they do something really complicated, doesn't sound like it, but they micro texture smooth surfaces. And so surgical tools, think about grip, basically. So they're ready to go. And the founder said, you know, I want to do one more. They have a scientific advisory board, meaning physicians that are trying their product out. So let's do one more test of the technology before we submit. One of the doctors thought there was too much grip. That's what they're trying to get, right? Too much. Holy cow. This is a 4-month process when they're ready to submit for FDA, a redo. So why is that? That doesn't sound like a long period of time, but when you don't have a lot of cash and you're burning $150,000 a month on your product and manufacturing, that's a pretty serious technical problem delay. It's not a business risk. So that's the double whammy for you all, right? Is you're attempting something with probably more technical risks than software companies in general. And then you have all the business risk that everybody faces on top of it. So this is the world we live in. Yeah.
You don't have to help your software companies be able to operate your
Yeah, absolutely.
That is hard.
No, I think people generally know what the standard is now.
Okay.
Well, I wouldn't say generally, they do know what the standard is. Yeah. So I think when it first came out, it was not obvious. For example, if you have to effectively remove someone's information, what does that even mean? I mean, how do you remove yourself in a digital world? So luckily those big question marks are resolved. And, you know, hard to predict, but I think some flavor of that's coming to the US at some point. I mean, I think just societally, we're pretty close to that. So yeah. So yeah, that is not my area of expertise. I definitely know enough about it to be dangerous, but yeah. So yeah, great questions. Just keep them coming. I'll just keep going, but please jump in questions. So I want to stop on or dwell on the slide just for a minute, only because I feel like, you know, everybody wants to contribute in their career, profession, and so on. I feel like this is kind of our contribution in Sphere. It's not much to marvel at because it's not scientific discovery. But so here's the thing I was seeing when I came to Sphere. I was you know, a lot of finance and business background, but not startups. Every single company that came in the door said, I'm a startup. And like, hold on, you're like literally two guys, was guys mostly at the time, you know, and a dog working in a garage. Okay. Okay, well, what's the definition of a startup? So it took a little bit of time to sort of sift through this. But the only reason this is reasonably important just to stop and talk about is you need to be self-aware of where you are in the real world, because here's the problem. If you come to apply to Innosphere's program and you say you're a startup, we look at your application, it's going to be pretty obvious you probably haven't done the basics to actually start the business. I don't mean forming the company, by the way. That's not what I'm talking about. But you haven't taken some of the steps have to take to know that you're really committed to working on the business. So without getting into all this, most companies I'd say that come our way have actually started only. And so companies that are in that at that point, which is great, the resources you need, frankly, are different. And for example, the Small Business Development Center, which a lot of kind of technology founders kind of poo-poo the SBDC office, not at all, by the way. You can get a ton of great business education there, 100%. You got to take advantage of it. So, this is definitely our term of art. I'm sure you won't see this anywhere else, but where we're going to be relevant is in this formation stage. We've either got grant funding, we've raised some capital, some people working full-time on this company. Great. We can do a lot of good work with a team that looks like that. Also, we get less so these days. I'm not sure what the reason for that is. We used to get a lot of companies that were applying to come into this program that were too late. Like, guys, we can't help you. You're 12, 15 people. You've gone through a seed round. The direction of the company's pretty well set. Why are you even looking for advice at this point from a group like us? Now, why is this important? Because if you apply to accelerator programs outside the hub, not the hub's accelerator program, but you really have to be where you are, and if you map to what they're going to provide value to. So pretty important concept. And then also, as you're raising money, you also have to be clear where you are. So if you go and pitch an investor, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, and you say, hey, we're doing a seed round of funding, and it's literally a couple of people working on something, haven't really done a whole lot, you're probably pre-seed, or you're probably need to stick even in grants. And so it shows a level of sort of misunderstanding when you're out there describing your company in a certain way, particularly to investors. And so, just think about this nomenclature, and then also, where are you? And I think it helps also to say, well, what's the step from here to there? If you move out of this idea of everybody's a startup and say, hey, we formed a company, what do we need to do next? We need to go get some money. How do we do that? Great. Maybe grants, maybe friends and family, by the way. Not a lot of investors will say that. I don't poo-poo family and friends money at all. That's how a lot of companies start up. So great, go. If you've got wherewithal within your immediate network to go raise money, go do that. Absolutely. So hopefully it helps you kind of pinpoint, okay, here's where I am, and then how do I evolve and move from stage to stage? Does it all make sense? Okay. All right. So couple quick ones. If you are a life sciences company looking for help, Innosphere runs a program. We do year-long programs. They're pretty intensive. No travel, so it's not like an accelerator would move you somewhere, but just hit the website, look for the application that starts in April. If you're in the energy tech space, you already missed our programming for this year. We're underway about 7 weeks or so. So look for that down the road. If you're in the smart city space, you need to get an application in pretty much immediately. We'll look at it. So those are the 3 kind of dedicated programs we run. Smart cities would be 6 months. The other 2 are 12 months. And we team with someone to run the second 6 months of the process with us on smart cities.
That RTech, does that include firmware type, where it's more of that transitional from the software back into actual?
In fact, this program is pretty specific because it's funded by the Department of Energy. We can't do cyber, for example, and no pure software companies. It all is literally hard tech. It can be connected devices. There has to be some hardware or physical product in that. So, yeah. Okay. So we're Colorado based, but work over 10 to 12 states, depending on what we're doing. These are the university partners we work with. Utah and Arizona are grayed out only because we do a ton of work there, but we haven't really formalized the university partners there for a variety of reasons I won't get into here. But we definitely, for example, when we market programs, we'll include ASU and Arizona, schools like that. And then in Utah, we work mostly with the University of Utah. So this is kind of the footprint. The reason that's reasonably important is increasingly we're running programs over many states. because, I think the good part of COVID for us was, hey, we were very in person and, place-based, I would say. And I think we were starting to move virtual more and more before COVID. Now we're like, hey, it doesn't make any sense to not do this. So the good news is we can open up content and work with companies really all over the place. Do a couple of international programs. We work with the UK government, the Canadian government, and then we also have a fund that invests in Israel, only in Israeli companies. So a little bit of international flavor. I think it just helps us get a perspective of what's going on outside the US, which is nice. It's all clean tech and SaaS in that case. We don't do any medical out of that fund. Yeah. No. Yeah, it's all. Yeah. It's a bit unique because of who funded it. So it had back when we started, it was, not what we call climate tech, but a really heavy climate focus, SaaS, it's a bit of a unique fund in that has some specific requirements, but basically anything in the life sciences arena, we do not invest in. We do. Yep. They are. Yeah, we got in a good water company early in that fund. So yeah, I kind of stood that up, and then I focus more on our US VC now. So we're just about to publish new metrics, but so when we look across all the companies that we supported in a year, what I love to see in aggregate is the companies raised more than 20 million and created more than 200 jobs. That's like just my go-to as soon as we compile this. The companies in 2022 did great. They raised about 36 million, about 220, 30 jobs, which is great. We collect a lot of other things, patents and so on, but why the capital raise number is so important is the companies we're supporting are pre-seed, seed, and fewer in A round. So $20 million and $500,000 investments in 750s is quite a lot of capital for the companies to raise. On our fund side, the companies collectively in 5 years have raised about 260 million and are probably close to 500 FTE created. So it's different scale when you start putting money in, you can see the difference. In the incubation program, very, very happy at 20 million plus. Whereas on the VC side, you want to, those are bigger numbers once you start raising. So I'm going to skip through the fund side just because I'll talk a little more about it. And these are just fun pictures of our office, Wet Labs. And we opened 9,000 feet of lab space last summer and opened full, which was really exciting. So we have supporting 10 new companies, in the life sciences space in this building we just opened. Okay, so I'm going to move away from the Innosphere general stuff. Last chance to just any general questions before we jump into the next two topics. Yeah. When you say more resources, I'm not sure. Oh, I would say it's customized to life sciences, but I wouldn't say it's more, it's just different. So in the life science program, if you're, I'll jump ahead a little bit and not talk about this just because it's a good question. If you're doing something in the life sciences space, and we're not pharma investors, so just bear in mind, because, small funds cannot do pharma. This is too big. But if it's medical technology, a couple of things. Most funds, and what you need to prepare for is building a company, are not in order. Want to see real IP that you've created. Want to have a confidence level, you understand the regulatory environment. Probably have an opinion, that's what you get from a firm that's credible. We'd also want you to see a clear reimbursement strategy. Those are the big ones. And then some sort of, business and technical team that can take that to market. So that's mainly what we're focusing on in life sciences. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, got a question. It's kind of technical, but trying to understand whatever phase you start, whatever you qualify. You're a 501c, but you're a P6. Is there, what kind of agreement would be signed? Is it whatever the technology is, it's a reimbursement. It's not an angel.
Oh, yeah, so this is really, really important. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit. That is one business. And the VC is a totally different business. We share the same name. Yeah. Sorry, and the real estate, we developed some of it privately because we use tax credits and some of it through it gets very complicated. But think of these as interrelated, but completely firewalled separate businesses. The VC, we're investing for equity, 100%. Yeah. Sorry, I kind of glossed over that. Yeah, that's pretty important to understand. But we run it all under one umbrella of Innisfree Ventures, and that's what is kind of cool about how we approach it. We're not just investors or just running incubation, kind of trying to do those three things. So I'm going to sort of switch over to this idea of why do startups fail? And I think the number one reason that we don't have data for is that the founders weren't ready to do it. They weren't committed, weren't ready, didn't have the background, whatever. And so I just want to share a little bit of information with you, about that. And I think for me, what it comes down to when we're meeting teams that are coming into the incubator program, it's pretty clear when we're seeing teams that are really committed. I mean, just at their core, personally, mentally. It's not easy. And it's not easy to start any company, by the way, but then start a technology company. Boy, you got the technical risk and all the business risks wrapped into one. So, I stumbled on this book a number of years ago, called Power of Purpose. And what I would encourage you to do before you may have already jumped off the cliff and started a company. I'm not saying go back, but if you haven't, kind of interesting, not surprising conclusion that this gentleman, I spaced his first name, his name is Leiter, his last name, but his book is Power of Purpose. And so he's a psychologist, and he interviewed lots and lots of people. So this is like a data-driven, not, personal opinion book, which is great. What his strategy was, he went out and interviewed mostly older people, and basically kind of distilled down the three things he learned. And he did it through inquiry and discussion. And what he found that older, these are Americans, so a huge bias here. Older Americans were saying, if you could go back and live life over, it came to three things: be more reflective, be more courageous, and be more clear about purpose. And I read that, I was like, holy cow, if you don't have all three of those things as starting a company, you're probably not very likely to be successful. So it's not necessarily, I took it a little bit out of context, but I think this is where I would really encourage you to really do the soul searching on this. Now, you got to be tremendously courageous to start a company and get into the uncertainty, 100%. Reflective, I think I'll get to what that might mean in a minute. Reflective means, what am I trying to get out of this in my view? We meet with teams all the time. That's pretty clear the founders are not in alignment about what they're trying to achieve. Someone, be perfectly happy with a great salary and a stable job. That's not generally a startup, and not one that's going to raise money, by the way. Some may be motivated by, boy, if we can create this, this unique technology, get in the market and sell it. Wow. And I want to do 2 more of those in my career, 3. That's totally different than I'd love a stable job, to say the least. And that's clear about purpose. So just get you thinking about that before we get into some data, because I do think this is a challenge. Now, related to that, there's a group called Activate, and love their work, so I stole this from them. But what they do is work with, I'd say, predominantly technical founders, mostly in a university environment, to try to get at some of these core questions of the why and the purpose and what am I trying to get at. And I love this because I'm going to show you some questions we've used over the years called personal goals. And I realized when I saw their work a couple of years ago that our inquiry, working founders was a little bit off. But so after the purpose and the why, commitment, all those other things, these are questions I don't think many technical founders ask very early on. And I'm not going to read them or go through them all, but just a really good one is, if I'm developing something, and let's just say maybe I'm more impact or I'm more oriented for the humanitarian aspect of what I'm doing. And let's just hypothetically say there's a great DoD military application that's more clear, more straightforward to market. Boy, that's going to be a massive conflict with the personal goals of the founder, right? So you'll get these slides. So again, I encourage you as a team, work through these kind of things earlier than not, and you'll avoid conflicts and things down the road between founders. So again, you can kind of read these and see them. And I'll spend a minute on. So we've kind of over the years refined our thinking on about 10 critical questions that we think every founder and as a founding team, you have to work through as a group. So I didn't list them all, but just I want to kind of talk about a couple. One is, what is your role? So going back to that, when I showed you that, hey, we've started a company and then we're evolving. What is your role over time that you're envisioning, imagining? I would, we can talk a little about that, what that might look like in a minute. Here's one that's really interesting, because I'd say 30-ish, maybe 35% of the companies that come to Innosphere, maybe a little higher some years, have a university connection. And so this question isn't as relevant for faculty founders. It's very relevant for technical founders who escaped, jokingly, a large company. And the question is control. And what you find when you really dig into this question around what is your opinion of control, a strong motivation for a lot of technical founders, I don't want to work in a big organization anymore. Okay, is that a great reason to do a startup? Okay, could be. Is it a good reason to start a business that cash flows and has long-term sustainability? Yes. Is it a company that can raise outside money? No. And so where are you going to run squarely into that when you start dealing with investors? Just the reality is nobody doesn't have a boss. That just doesn't exist unless you're independently wealthy. You can do whatever the heck you want. But you take other people's money, guess what? They're buying a seat at your table, and they're going to be at your table for a long time, until you grow the business and figure it out. And so that's a struggle for a lot of technical founders, especially again, that have been in larger company environments. So we're trying to get out of that. So anyway, a couple things to think about. Another big one that trips people up is, we're very direct about this. What wealth? It's a very specific question, not why are you starting the company, right? This is a very specific question about what's the financial objective. And it's funny when we get founders who are off one-on-one and, oh, what would be great for you? And, I literally had one, this is a guy who's been up in his career, said, if I made enough money to remodel my house and pay some debt off and have a little money for retirement, I'm happy. It's like, whoa, okay. I'm not saying that bar's low, but that wasn't what I was expecting. And then on the very extreme other end, people have very overinflated ideas about exit values they might achieve. And you might get people like, oh my gosh, I'm going to create $1 billion company with a bunch of ownership and I'm make a huge amount of money. Good luck. Statistically, that's pretty improbable. So here's the problem is, let's say there's 3 founders and you're not in alignment on that. You can't grow. You're not going to grow the same business. I mean, one person can have sort of an idea, this is the way I want to go, particularly the security piece of it. If looking for security in the job in a startup, I would say don't go there. It's not where you go find secure employment. Unless you build a really nice company that cash flows and you don't raise money and you build a business on debt, go for it all day. But that's not what kind of companies I'm talking about. That makes sense? So, before I jump into the real topic of why companies fail, this is actually the number one. Teams that blow apart, they're not on the same page, start raising money, how you build a company, what type of money to take, who you're going to hire, not in alignment. And then suddenly you've got a company that's established with ownership is really hard to untangle all that. Really, really hard to do that. We see companies all the time. We call it dead equity, dead, not debt, sorry. We'll, get a cap table, be working. Well, who are these two other people on the cap table? Like, where are they? We haven't met any. Oh, they're gone. Well, these guys, guys, women, 40% of your business. Okay, one, you didn't put a vesting schedule in place, and two, you didn't have a specific mechanism to get them out so you could carry on. It's killed that company. You cannot invest in that business. So this is really, really important stuff. And unfortunately, this doesn't get collected in the data of why companies are failing. But this is the fundamental number one reason in my mind. You can't get out of the blocks for these reasons.
So it's really interesting. Wondering what people does when you start and launch.
Yep.
As you get into the funding, said somebody's going to buy a seat at the table,
Mhm.
and you're either giving up a percentage of your company to that. What I hear you saying, you're challenging this really at that start stage to kind of think through that.
Absolutely, that start phase. So this is, yeah.
Or
Sure.
that's working.
We'll cover that specifically in a minute, but absolutely. Yeah, and this is why just not being in agreement on these things right up front, so many companies never even get to the point of even going out to raise money. We couldn't even literally start the company up. Or we did, we put an LLC together, it's easy, and it never got on the radar, doesn't even get tracked as a business fail, that kind of thing. So we don't have good data on this, but I'm very confident this is the number one problem and avoidable. So that's the good news. Is like, I'm not, they're not throwing a wet blanket on what you're doing, but saying, hey, this is avoidable, but you got to do it. This is hard work. You got to be really direct and honest and open. And, if you're motivated to make money, great. Just say it. If that's principal motivation, what you're trying to do, fantastic. Then if other co-founders you're working with aren't, great, go find the people that are. And then that's a prototypical company you can build. I'll just use the term headquarter company. Investors might say lifestyle company, and that is absolutely a slap in the face. Guess what? Virtually every company in the United States is a headquartered company, meaning Main Street retail, franchise restaurants. These are all companies that are headquartered in a geography, and that is absolutely a legitimate business goal. But don't confuse that with a company that should raise angel and venture capital. Those are two completely different things. That's where people, I think, don't fully connect those dots, because you're not looking to exit. You're trying to build a business and wealth, an asset, but it's not built to sell. That's the big difference. Or if it's built to sell, maybe way outside the range of where VCs are going to be interested. Okay. All right. So let's transition here. This is a great book. Usually I recommend a few books to people. This one I pick up, a guy named Tom Eisman. Interesting story behind this book. He teaches entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School and is an angel investor, and found himself making bad angel investments, and companies were like imploding, and he knew these people. Most of them went to HBS. And so he's like, hold on, I know these people. I'm a reasonably smart guy, and I can't pick the right bets. I'm not making the right bets. So that's what motivated him to write this book, which was cool. Tom's pretty gracious. He's periodically does webinars with us, I think when he gets bored. So if you get on our mailing list for events, go to innosphereventures.org. You can sign up for just webinars and things. He's a very gracious guy. So that's the context. So he's like, holy cow, I can't figure this out. I'm a pretty smart guy, know these founders inside and out. Why are these deals not working? So again, back to this slide you saw. These are elements of what he found for sure, and very relevant. We're going to drill a little bit deeper. So Tom Eisman does a lot of writing around entrepreneurship, and so he definitely blends a lot more background, I'd say, and sophistication than just looking at this question of failure. So which is nice. So he defines entrepreneurship as pursuing a novel opportunity while lacking resources, which I think is a pretty decent, elevator pitch. I have nothing better. If you do great, use it. So that's kind of the way he talks about it. So, so right up front, when you're starting your company, if you think about those two dimensions, those are conflicting. And so what does this mean? So if you're pursuing something novel as an opportunity, by definition, and it's a startup, you don't have resources unless you have personal resources. On the other hand, this is the catch-22. You can't amass resources, right? Because you don't have a track record and we're new and so on. This just swirls around until finally you break through this. So I think this is just a nice way to think about that tension and when you're feeling that in your company, just know that's universal to everyone. And the whole game plan is to break out of that, but recognize that fundamentally that's why you're under so much stress as a young company, because got something really cool, can't talk somebody into getting your resources, keep pushing the idea forward a little bit more, it just swirls around until you get a breakthrough, and that can happen in a variety of ways. So, so in this book Tom wrote, basically he boiled things down, which I appreciate, into simplicity, and then backed it up with data and said, hey, the reason companies fail, rather straightforward. They kind of fall in two camps: right idea, wrong resources. We'll go deep on these, right, just a minute, but just think about that for a minute. So right idea, wrong resources. Teams not aligned on what are we trying to do, right? That's what that could mean. Or, hey, we got the wrong investors. We took someone's money. We probably knew we shouldn't. And now it's incredibly hard to build this business with this albatross around our neck, right? Or we picked the wrong partner. That's what that means. So the other way is wrong idea, but right resources. So you may have do everything right, but maybe just the idea fundamentally isn't, the time's not right. All kinds of issues with why you can have wrong idea. It could be regulatory failure, right? Didn't achieve, that level of approval, all kinds of things. This is fairly helpful because for me, it's not, when you see a company that doesn't work out, it's not very obvious sometimes, even though we know these businesses very well, what actually happened that sort of was the tipping point. But generally speaking, you zoom back up, this is pretty much it. And I think it's a nice summary. So let's talk about this concept that Tom writes about called bad bedfellows and what that means. Okay. And I apologize for the slide. These are Tom's slide, by the way. I haven't changed them and they're very hard to read. I was giving a bunch of crap because he teaches at Harvard. Like, I can do better slides than you, man. Anyway, but so let's kind of talk we talked a bit about this already. The founder fit, as he would call it, meaning we don't have the right people. We don't have the same objectives. We don't have that alignment, whatever that is. Okay. So that cascades into a whole variety of other problem areas. So let's take the poor founder fit. Teams that are not AA plus go out and bring talent in the business. So think about how hard it is to hire great people. Great people see right through this. And so guess what? You start compromising on all your hiring, right? Because you can't get the right people, or you get the right people. They're like, I don't know about you all. I'm not sure I want to jump on this train with you, right? That's what that looks like. That also results in mismatch of funders. So if you don't have an A+ team, you don't have that cohesiveness, 100% unravels in the fundraise. Because what do people like us do when we invest? We're going to dive deeply into your motivation, your background, why are you passionate about this? And it's not to catch anybody. We're just trying to learn about you. But it becomes very obvious very quick if the founders aren't aligned. They, sort of great pitch, had a couple of good meetings, everything seems great. And then you're like, whoa, these folks are not on the same page. You stop right there. Guess what? Suboptimal funders. Maybe we're going to overlook that. You know, maybe other investors are going to be more opportunistic. They're going to know you're in trouble. They're going to go for harder, you know, valuations, things like that. That's where the mismatch happens. Guess what? And that is a horrible way to start a relationship with your investor on that note. And then lastly, poor partner fit, meaning almost every company out there has to partner with multiple folks along the way, whether it's your regulatory consultant, whether it's a large firm that might be white labeling, just means, hey, I'm going to sort of rep your product. Just go through the list. Outside engineers, contractors, manufacturers, a long list. So again, if you're not fully dialed in, you will not get those great partners. So this just cascades into these areas. Does that make sense? Bad bet, fellows? Yeah.
Do you see that kind of filtration thought process when you're like vetting out a number of, some of this I know this, you're not gonna be able to get it one for one, but just stacking chips. That's
No. I'm sorry, I can't hear you guys. I'm on the Zoom meeting. I'm sorry.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Hey, there we go. Sorry about that, everybody.
Great. How's that, everybody? Okay. So anyway, the point is great tools out there. Looking at the market product. That's the idea of this double diamond is you're looking broadly, narrowing, and then doing the same and continuously doing that till you kind of have it nailed. And then ultimately you get that first product or MVP. Okay, makes sense. All right. False positives are for companies that are in true startup mode and selling. So you know, if you've not been at this point yet, you will be. So false positives just means that in virtually every technology market, there are early adopters that get you confused about who the buyer is. And so, you know, I think this is pretty widely understood these days. Jeffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm, this is the work he did years ago. His work has stood the test of time 100%. But what this looks like is, hey, we got something out in the market. And there are lots and lots of people professionally that are motivated to try out innovative things. And we'll spend money to do that. They'll do proof of concept projects. They'll buy incomplete products, all kinds of psychological reasons behind this I won't get into. So read this book, Crossing the Chasm, if you want to dig into this. The challenge is, and there's sort of I've seen a magic number, not that there's a rule of thumb, but many companies can get to about $1 million in revenue reasonably quickly. And guess what? That's all those early adopters, tech enthusiasts. The challenge is that buyer set is completely different than a more what's called mainstream buyer set. And this is where it can get really confusing who you're selling to and do I have something? So there's some really staggering statistics on how few companies in the United States get beyond $1 million in revenue. All companies, but tech in particular. And what they've done is just ran right into this problem. And so recognizing that the early buyers' motivation to buy your product and adopt what you're doing is different. And you have to factor that into your product plan. So a lot of companies, I'll just use the term complete product. That doesn't necessarily mean it's complete, but bear with me. Oftentimes people will try things out that's part of a solution. So great example, this was in treated frack water back in the day. So as frack water was starting to get regulated, guess what? Everybody's doing that work, had to start monitoring this water. Well, that's just a part of a process. Lots and lots of companies came out, thinking, oh boy, I'm going to attack that market. Well, ultimately what was needed was a complete process though, of managing water end to end. That was a complete product for the customer. It wasn't this analytical piece of the water coming out from the frack event that I need to understand what the constituency was. That was just a piece of it. And so you can look in lots of different industries and see companies attacking point problems. So mainstream buyers, think of it from your perspective. If you're an established business and maybe you're not super innovative, you're not going to buy something that's not what you perceive as a complete product. And so lots of people fall in that trap. They have a piece of the solution. They haven't figured out how to put all that together through a partnership with others that can have it, offer the complete product, or they don't have the technology roadmap to get there. So I kind of mentioned this already, but the basics there around managing the false positive is that is the product plan, is having clarity that this is likely the MVP, the early product that an early adopter would take on, and is not likely the mainstream solution. And you have to understand the difference between that. It's not always obvious. So, and you're probably going to hit that in your startup around $1 million, $2 million in revenue. Just, it's sort of almost magically, regardless of what you're doing, sort of appears at that time frame for some reason. So does that make sense? False positives, crossing the chasm is you want to go deep on this. Great book, Jeffrey Moore, very, very widely known in this area. Okay. All right. So you're probably wondering, Mike, when do you get to the point? Okay. So here's the good news. So I mentioned there's data and there's a lot of thinking that's gone into how to help companies not fail. So here's Tom Eisman's contribution. I love it because, hey, maybe I'm simplistic. I always tell people I went to public school. So don't complicate things too much. But so what he came up with this idea of diamond and square. And so the idea, I'll kind of run through this here in a minute, is getting back to this tension of, I've got this opportunity, I need resources. How do you blend that together into a model that will help you think through how you're trying to attack the business? So I like this. I mean, I'm not oversimplifying, but it is straightforward. And so, for example, if you're having problems in your business, it's a pretty good diagnostic. Is it, do we have problems on the founding team? Do we have challenges with our investors? Do we choose the wrong partners? Are we hiring poorly? Those are pretty good indicators that maybe things aren't going great. Or as you're building your business, being very deliberate around those things. And then inside the diamond are basically the resources. So do we have the right value proposition? So getting back to the early adopters of a technology, that value proposition for those earlier adopters is different than your later stream customers. So that'd be an example. Hey, it's a value proposition, clear what we're trying to do at that point in time. Young companies oftentimes think they don't need to be great at operations, including things like HR. Incorrect. You got a lot to deal with, and how you execute from an operational standpoint, particularly in product companies, critical. So, when we look at younger companies, it's not unusual at all to see fairly sophisticated operating models and companies that are laissez-faire, very loosely organized, will have a lot of problems as they get into their business if they're not organized. Yes. %. Yeah, just go back one real quick. So a guy named Jeffrey Moore came up with this framework for tech companies. And what he absolutely definitively found is that there's different buyer sets. And particularly these innovators and early adopters, which is a small part of your market, are not your mainstream market. And so he coined this term, the chasm, crossing the chasm. And that's where companies get stuck. They do not cross it and get stuck, $1 million, $2 million revenue. Not saying there's bad businesses, but that's probably not what they were trying to accomplish. That's the concept, is don't mistake those early customers for late stage. I think every tech company we work with, except probably some SaaS companies, have no idea how to market themselves. And I don't mean that we're like B2C, but the basics, websites, basic promotional material. I have a social presence, I'm not talking anything too sophisticated, and then getting more sophisticated as you go. Not talking sales, talking about promoting your business. And then lastly, you have to make money. Okay, so diamond, square, let's run through these real quick. Okay, so I think you're getting a lot of coaching, I know, at the Hub around value proposition. I won't spend a ton of time on this. But fundamentally, what this means is how are you positioned to meet a customer need in a differentiated way? So in other words, is there a need there? And then getting back to one of the failure points, competition. Am I differentiated? Meaning, if I get into market, can I even be successful? This idea of value proposition. Here's the problem with differentiation. And think about that just in your own context. I'll use Innosphere, for example. We are completely a different organization than 10 years ago. 100%. I think that's one thing we've done extremely well over a long period of time, is adapted. Here's a great example of that, just a small one. So when Steve Blank's work first came out around the customer discovery, guess what? There wasn't ICOR. There wasn't all these programs that exist now. So we went and got somebody certified to do customer discovery, and we're doing that internally to help companies. Well, guess what? In not short order, the small business development centers were offering that. It's like, boy, we want to get out of that like immediately. So it's an example. We weren't differentiated at all doing customer discovery, and we're constantly changing how we react to our market, which is startups. This is really hard. I mean, to maintain differentiation, it's easy to say. It is hard to do in a business. But that's part of differentiation is, guess what? It never ends because your competition is constantly changing. You got new entrants. You have big companies doing different things, seeing opportunities. I mean, it's just constantly changing out there.
Sounds like it, clearly the value proposition that you created at one point is getting to that point of a mass market, say, virtual power plants, something that's really techy.
Yep. Well, let's kind of just go deeper on that a minute. Let's say your medical device, you are not going to be long-term differentiated. You're going to get FDA approval. You're going to get sold to a big company with lots of salespeople. That just is the pathway. So you're not worried about differentiation there. You're only worried about early differentiation. So, but let's compare and contrast that with a software business, just because it's easy. So one of the companies we invest in has a very, very clear pathway on the product side to differentiate one and to sell to and acquire different types of customers in that food chain, or that different type of buyer set. So let's talk about their issue. Is a bit of a unique company because they're selling financial software into the public sector, which is like, people are like, what? You know, why do they do that? Well, they have quietly completely revolutionized how the public sector budgets, which doesn't sound very exciting, except governmental accounting probably hasn't changed in 100 years. And if you looked at a public sector budget, they're unintelligible and they're not strategic. So boy, think of as a mission, holy cow, that's a huge one. I mean, most city budgets are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, these are not trivial budgets. So, but what are they doing? So they attacked the market early on with an Excel product that was basically fill it in. We're going to get your budget reformatted in a way that you can make strategic decisions, knowing full well they would become a software company. That was early adopters. Guess what? Tons of CFOs like, are you kidding me? I'll do my $500 million budget in Excel all day because the underlying system I use can't produce this result I want for the elected officials and management. So it's painful to do it. You're basically creating two budgets, right? I mean, that's how, that type of, wow, passionate early adopters. So once they figured out how to do that properly, they were really learning, wanted to understand how data should be input and exported, or output, I should say. Guess they created an early SaaS product. Dramatic improvement for everybody using Excel because had some basic APIs. Great, I can take Oracle data and dump it and so on. What are they becoming? They're going to be a full-blown budgeting tool for every public sector organization that will adopt them, including school districts, colleges, universities, and so on. That's not widely understood, but that's that product differentiation. And they've got this nailed, 100% nailed. And you know, at every turn, they're lighting a little bit of a new piece of this up and saying, oh boy, you know, early adopters, can we create some rudimentary full budget documents for you? Or, you know, these are clunky. But guess what? Virtually everybody they wanted to try, trial it, did it. And they're like, we never want to go back to putting, big budget documents together in Word. And so that's their process of differentiation, but it's very tightly mapped to their product plan. So that's how you do it in non-medical companies. Now, in digital health, you do it the same way. Product plan, investment plan that maps to that and so on. That makes sense? I'll try to give real examples. Hopefully that makes it a little bit more concrete. Okay. All right. Won't spend a ton of time on this, but what you'd find when you get in and start working with investors, they will want to understand if you have a capable team to execute. meaning operations. And let's talk about some of the basic operational things, hiring people. I mean, a lot of technical founders have never actually hired that many people and hate HR. I'm not saying I'm an HR lover, but in other words, would actively sort of go out of their way to not go through, their HR folks. They do not have an operational understanding of how to build a team. I mean, yeah, maybe they can go find a few people in their own network, but how are you going to hire 10 or 15 or 20 people in a year without some basic operational understanding of that? The more straightforward ones are product. Do we have people that understand product planning and can execute to milestones on product? That's fairly straightforward. Another operational area that many technical founders cannot stand is finance. So for example, when we invest, we require the companies to outsource their finance reporting to a credible firm. Because one, we don't want the management team even worrying about it. And two, we want financial statements every month and every quarter, 100%, no delays, right? So why would you spend time doing that? But that's operational excellence and understanding of what we should be doing, not doing. I go through the list, but that's what I mean by that. Same thing for HR, by the way. If you're starting a company and you're not using what's called a professional employment organization or a PEO, you are crazy. TriNet and Sparity, these are the firms, big ones out there. Go find one of those firms, 100%. And if you get investors, they're probably going to make you, by the way, for a variety of reasons. But it allows you to focus on the business operations and not the administration. That's the key. I talked about marketing. I think we get it. It's hard to find time, in a young company to do marketing. I'm not talking about writing multi-page blogs. That's just to be clear, but regular posting in social media, writing up some basic press releases and even just putting them on your website. So when someone searches your company, what is going to come up? If you're not thinking about that, and I mean, oftentimes if I've not done my homework, which is fairly often, outside of reading a company's deck, I'll probably be sitting in a meeting with my laptop open. I'm not taking notes. I'm probably Googling something they said. And at some point, if I didn't remember to Google the company just straight up before the meeting, I'm going to do it during the meeting because I want to see what comes up, and hey, if you've been around in business for 6 or 12 months and you don't have 8 to 10 press releases out that you're just writing and even putting on your website, you're nuts. You got to find the time to do that. You're in a college town, hire a junior, senior marketing undergrad. They can blow the doors off of even older marketing people. They understand the social part, the technology, highly motivated, good writers, right? Bring those people in as interns and have them do that work for you. Yeah.
Your website and Google banks and other companies like that as well. It's also they want to look at the Facebook message,
It's easy to do the search, right? I'll clarify for most fund VC, let's call, they're probably not doing anything but looking at your LinkedIn. So, I'd say not, if you're a consumer facing product company, 100% you've got to have all that, but we're not B2C. I'm sure the VCs would diligence that part, but a basic social presence, LinkedIn, website, doing some posting. That's what we're talking about. All right. Profit formula is pretty easy. Can we make money? And this is a tricky question because startup early stage finance is different, meaning, at very high costs for producing things. If you're IP heavy, you're spending a lot of money on attorneys as a small company. So you have to factor all that in. And certainly in the early days, you're not making any money, you're burning money, but can you get to the point in a reasonable amount of time, you're making money? And boy, we spend a ton of time working with companies on their models because they all kinds of big problems there, but mostly overshooting revenue, undershooting expenses, to put it simply. It is off. It's never going to go like you think. And it's always going to cost more than you think. So trying to reconcile those and help come up with the right plan that ultimately creates profit is the key, right? Okay, so let's run around the outside of the square here. We talked a bunch about founder fit. I'm not going to talk any more about that. I think we get the idea. A team, what drives me crazy is when I see companies that have started up and it's, 6 or 7 people from the same college, the same background, and absolutely no differentiation in background, race, ethnicity, all the above. This is not the way you build a company because that's not the real world. And so that's what I would encourage you strongly to do is think through how you're going to build a balanced team, I'll call it. And that can mean a variety of different things in your own context. But very few companies get this right at the early stages. Now, when this couple founders get it, you typically are going to go to your professional network. You're probably going to start a company with somebody you know. I get it. But beyond that, how are you going to build that balanced team? Age, everything, right? So think that through. Investors, we've hit a little bit. Let's be realistic on, I always love the, find the right investor. That assumes you've got 20 investors staring you in the face, vying for a term sheet, which is not realistic. How much can you really pick out your investors? About 0. But what you can avoid is don't take bad money. People that are not aligned with you on how you're going to build the business. Anything remotely that looks unethical, run. People that have difficult personalities on the investment side, you're going to work with these people extremely closely for a period of time. I always tell people imagine sitting around Thanksgiving table with these folks a year or 2 years from now. What's that going to look like? I mean, is it somebody you don't want even over to your house? Because, you'd be embarrassed to introduce them to your family. It's like, don't take that money. Other than that, guess what? Your choices are going to be fairly limited. So don't take bad money. Yeah.
Are there phases of startup that expenses that you can kind of look out for? Okay, when this month, this quarter, this month, this quarter, is there a way to do that with expenses?
Yeah, in fact, you have to do that. So, sorry. I'm not going to get into this when I talk about raising money here in a minute, so I'll just jump to this. So when you're sitting down talking to an investor, they're going to say something like, and it probably will be exactly this, tell me what your use of funds is. Guess what? You better have your spreadsheet handy. What exactly am I going to spend your money on? Quarter by quarter, typically, even month by month, some cases, multi-year. So you have to account for all the expenses that you anticipate. And you're good investors. And again, it's not a gotcha game, right? But they're going to go into and say, oh my gosh, you wildly underestimated your product development expenses. Or did you get bids for the engineering work or the early production? Is it just an estimate or do you get a bid? Huge difference, right? That's the kind of thing you're going to dig into on that use of funds. But it's absolutely the accounting of here's how much money we have and here's what we're going to spend it on at a detailed level. Okay. All right, strategic partners, and then I'll jump over to raising money. Here's the challenge. If you want to partner with a big company and you're a startup, what do big companies have more of in 2 specific areas? This is a joke: lawyers and finance people. I know you're a lawyer. But in really, working with large companies is extremely complicated. And guess what? They're not motivated by speed. And they got a ton more resources than you do. And so the process of partnering can take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and then oftentimes result in total failure anyway, even after you negotiated, some sort of agreement where maybe a large company is going to partner with you in some respect. Because maybe you didn't deliver the boost they wanted. They thought, oh boy, if we can get our sales team familiar with your product, we get it out there to our current customer base. Guess what? If they don't adopt, you're done. And imagine this in a startup life, 9 or 12 months to get an agreement with one company. This is tough stuff. And the agreements in particular, you have to get outside counsel for. Don't ever, and I know, most companies are thinly financed we work with, so, it's not like going to run a bunch of lawyer fees, but these corporate contracts, you'll read them, you will not know what it means or what it says unless you come from that world. And so I'd really caution you on the partnering, because guess what? Once you lock into these partnerships, depending on if they're exclusive or not, other issues, you're attached to these folks for a while. And so even the ability to get out of these things is really important. So lots and lots of roadkill from bad partners. Spent too long trying to partner, got really excited. We got the partnership done, didn't produce any sales. We're 24 months into it, ran out of money. Because we thought, boy, this is our savior. We can get this company selling our product effectively on, from their sales team on our behalf. This is gonna be fabulous. And it doesn't work out. It's very, very common. So anyway, just want to kind of talk about that one. Okay, switching gears. Let's talk about raising money. I don't have so many slides here. I'll jump around a little bit. So let's start with, and kind of challenge you to think about your personal goals and your motivation. I'll do the same thing again in a different way. You're thinking of or have started a company, and I can't wait till someone breaks this model, but it's been a while. But I think there's only 3 kinds of companies you can build. That's it, 3. Number 1 is that idea of a headquarter company. We're building something for long-term asset value. It's a cash generating business. It will be built largely on debt, meaning I can go to the bank or something like that. And that's how I'm going to build that company. That's most companies in the United States, by the way, right? So let's call that headquarters company. Okay, that's one flavor. Headquarter company, you do not go to angel investors and outside equity funders because there is no exit that's planned. Or if it is, it might be way off. Great company to build. We need more of them. Go do that if that's what you're trying to do. So let's talk about this idea of a venture-backed company. This is what mostly comes to mind when we think about technology and funding. What does that mean? So does anybody know how long typical venture funds last from the day they launch to when they end? 10 years. So crazily, we want companies to exit in 8 to 12 years. Okay, that pretty much maps to, hey, these are 10-year funds. Now in venture, here's the math. And there is definitely no definitive date on this, by the way. So I'll be a little careful. About a third of your portfolio, meaning if you invest in 10 companies, that's your portfolio. About a third of the companies will exit at something beyond about 2 times the investment. So in other words, if we put $1 million in a company, we want way more than 2 times back, but that's the reality. Is there only a handful will even do that. About a third will exit at 0 to 1, meaning we got our money back, maybe plus a little bit, but the internal rate of return stinks on that because we might have had that money parked in your business for 5 years or so. And then the other third don't return, meaning they become headquarter companies. This is where the angel investors in particular call them lifestyle companies. You get very frustrated, like I gave you a bunch of money and you're no longer shooting for an exit and I'm never getting my money back. And congratulations, you built a nice $2 or $3 million cash flowing business for yourself, but I'm never getting my money back. So it turns into that. So that's kind of flavor 2. And then flavor 3 is something we don't really talk that much about. I'd say in general in startups is something called early exit. And this was a model that was developed by a guy in Canada who was a VC. Well, first he was an entrepreneur, sold companies, built and sold companies, got into VC, and then thought the whole business was completely crazy and went on a crusade. I literally mean crusade globally to try to promote this idea of early exit. There's a book called Early Exit. If you're into this, it's a quick read. I would get it. It's about 10 years old, but it's fabulous. So the idea here is that the end game for most technical founders is to sell their company, either through a corporate acquisition or a buyout. Buyout means private equity. So not same difference. You're creating an event where I'm going to get paid for all the work I've done. So if that is your end game, then there's kind of two ways you can do it. One is try to build the biggest, most valuable company possible, not Silicon Valley exits, unicorn and more. That is a long process. Average time to IPO in the US last year was 13 years. It'll probably be 15 years next year because the IPO market was so bad this year and last 2 quarters of last year. 15 years, imagine that. Well, say 12, but that's a published number. Imagine that in your professional life. That's probably 20%, maybe something. I don't know how long people are going to work, but that is a huge time commitment. Guess what? In that time, you'll be sidelined and marginalized as a founder, because building a company like that, there's very few people that know how to do this, and they're probably not in Texas, where you are, maybe in Austin, definitely in Boston, New York, Silicon Valley, LA. So if you're trying to build that kind of company, you may have equity. You're going to get crushed on equity because you're going to raise hundreds of millions of dollars, and you probably aren't going to have a substantial role in that business. And I'm not trying to scare you off that, but that is exactly what a lot of people want to do. It's like, I want to get a small piece of something potentially huge. And I'm happy because I'm going to start my new venture up anyway. Great. I'm out of that. I have equity. I'm good. So I'm not knocking that. That is the VC world, is big funds, big returns. And they're shooting for a handful in their portfolio that can do that. And it is statistically a handful, right? So if you look at all the companies and how many IPO, it's a statistical improbability you're going to get to that level. So that's what this guy Basil Peters was bumping up against. Like, wait a minute, I'm working with great technical teams. We have an important technology that can be valuable for mostly 10 years ago as buyouts are more of a recent phenomenon, private equity. But why can't we build companies consistently to sell in 3-4 years? Capital light, early exit. That's the mantra. Now, not everything can be capital light for sure. So that is a different way of thinking. So getting back to when I was challenging on your motivation, it could be entirely plausible that you would want to build any one of these 3 types of companies. But but to be really clear, they are very, very different. How you approach it, how you raise money, and then what your personal expectations should be from a financial perspective is completely different. So what do we see more at Innosphere? Companies don't know it, but they're early exit. Not surprisingly, technical founders want some control of their business. And it's not a control freak thing. It's just, hey, we prefer that. We built this technology. Technical founders can take companies generally longer than I think the market perceives. We've experienced that big time. That's a good outcome. Some other companies, hey, I'm going to shoot for the fences, go big. So plant that seed, because you got to be really specific about what you're trying to do, because you got to align, in this case, directly with the kind of capital. You can't be joking around, going in your investors and go, hey, I'm going to try to build a unicorn business. Oh, just kidding. We're going early exit. You're going to have very, very tense board meetings for the entire life of your company, because you will not be in alignment at all. And you'll have a bunch of investors on your board. Okay. So last slide, and then, 2, and then I'll do Q&A. So here's a really interesting thing. So sorry, I love playing this game because I've been doing this for 10 years now. Headquarter, venture, early exit. No one's come up with something different, but I stole this from someone. It was a long time ago. I don't know who to attribute it to. So one of you can ever help me attribute it, I'm happy to do it. But 2, no one can fundamentally break this concept either, which is when you're raising money, you probably have one predominant risk factor and a secondary, well, a bunch of them, but one predominant risk factor at every point you're raising capital. Think about that just for a second. So what do I mean? So let's take a very early company that we'd invest in. You know, like, I mean, writing a first check for like 150,000. Every time it's product risk. Every time. Because why are you putting that money in? We want to say, we want you to go pay for a regulatory opinion and prototype this device, that costs money, and protect your IP. That 150 is gone, right? That. So what are we looking for? Could they hit those milestones? Usually that's 1 to 2 quarters is pretty quick. And it's sort of binary, yes, no. And if it's no, hey, we stop investing. If it's yes, great, we're going to write another check. So let's imagine this, when we write the next check, what's going to be probably the most important challenge? Team. So you have a technical founding team. Can you attract the 1 or 2 people that are critical to building your company in the next phase? Do you know who they are or how to find them? And then right after that is market, because you got something, hey, do we really have a confidence level there's market there? Now imagine you're a couple rounds in, you're probably going to be mostly concerned about this. It's how much money do we have to raise before we exit? So it's not just one, but in pretty much every case I can talk about in rounds of funding, it is generally one of these. If you could read an investment report from a VC, which unfortunately you can't, this is what, we don't use this model exactly, but that's what we're talking about right up front. What's the number one risk factor to make the investors aware of who we took their money? What's going to go wrong in this business? Is like early, didn't hit the product milestones, done. Or couldn't get the right team on board, done. The market's not there. We're not going beyond seed day, right? And then we're not late stage investors, so capital doesn't apply so much to us. But I would really challenge you to think about when you're raising money, the best thing you can do is actually identify the risk factor for your investor. Say, look, we know the key risk factor here is product. Here's how we're mitigating that. We brought in great outside experts. We went and got bids for the work we need to do. We benchmarked against companies that have been in the same, I'm making all this up, but right, you're identifying the problem and not requiring the investor to do it on your behalf. And so I think that's a great way to pitch, by the way. Okay, last slide. And this is probably what you thought we were going to talk mostly about, which I tricked you. Okay, so how do we raise money as a company? If you're early stage, and by the way, I can talk about any of these further, and you're in harder tech and you don't have grants from notable agencies, NIH, NSF, to go down the list, this is a problem, especially if you're in a university context. If you don't have that kind of early funding, it's not that you stop, but you wonder why. Why couldn't you win an important grant, from an agency that's going to be pretty rigorous about who they fund? So many companies don't stay on the grant train long enough, in my opinion, and particularly in medical. Every investment we write, we carve out some budget for grant writers because we want the companies to pursue as much non-dilutive funding as possible. And it's super expensive, about $25,000 a throw. So, so grants for us is, you win them as long as possible because it's great for founders, means you have more ownership of your business. Great for us, we have more ownership. We're all aligned about that. So you will run out of grant money at some point and the possibility of getting more grants. So where do we go from there? So this is where you might have heard the term pre-seed. And I like that term only because it can include a variety of things, including angels and small venture funds like ours. We're pre-seed investors. We write the first check typically at 150,000, 200-ish, and then we'll make a couple of investments. Angels do the same thing, although typically angel groups will write one check to you, maybe two, but think of it as sort of one and done generally. That's it for pre-seed. Friends and family definitely come in there. You have, family connections. I mean, literally raising from your uncle, but if it's fine. But usually it's family connections. Business people might know you personally, will take a bet on you. That all kind of falls in there. Once we get beyond that, seed capital is almost exclusively venture anymore. And I've got a little bit of data I'll flip through in a minute. Meaning it's small funds like ours doing seed rounds. Seed rounds have gotten pretty big. Angels definitely participate in those rounds, but they don't lead them. So it's not that say that's not important, but angels are particularly important at pre-seed. And then once you get beyond that, your institutional capital, meaning your venture capital and private equity. Let me just tell you the difference of private equity and venture capital. It's just the size of the amount of funding or funds you're dealing with. Although that's blurring. There are reasonably small private equity firms that look just like venture. So it gets a bit confusing, but think about venture as, hey, I'm going to go with these folks when I'm younger in my startup phase. At some point, you'll probably get into some private equity. Don't worry about it. It's one and the same. It's called an asset class. It's exactly the same. They share a different name. So and just give me 1 second because I did forget. I wanted to run through this real quick. So I tricked you again. I want to ground you just a little bit with some data before, any questions along the way, jump in. What this chart shows is the amount of venture capital that was deployed over a period of time from 2012 to 2022. So what you see here is this incredible run up to 2021, which probably will never happen again, by the way. But look at 2018, 19, 20. I mean, in our business, these were great years. Like, oh my gosh, more VC was deployed this year than last year. It's like, that was all great. 2021 was never going to be sustained at that level. So you hear a lot of lamenting in the VC world, like, oh, all this capital is drying up. No way. There's a ton of venture out there. It just was not going to sustain at 21 level. So just want to kind of just point that out. And this one, I know there's a lot to look at here, but what I want to try to show you here is when you look at all the venture that's deployed, how does it break down? Because that's really important to understand. And so when we look at this, it's easier for me to look at the table just because I'm standing up here. In 2022, there were 2,700 VC investments below $1 million. There were 4,000 between 1 and 5 million, about 1,900, 10 to 25 million, and so on. So what this shows you, particularly over time, is round sizes have gotten very large in a not very long period of time. What I mean by that is, visually, I think it's easier to see here. 40% of all deals were $1 million and below just 10 years ago. And certainly inflation has not been a factor, to say the least, in that time period. So just understanding how capital is deployed and at what stages can be quite important. This one's impossible to read. Let me just kind of walk you through it. What the takeaway here is, when you look at where all VC is deployed, guess what? Why are most funds software? Because most deals get done in software. It's just, I mean, being a little bit trite here, but that's the reality. And so that's that black bar. If you look at media, IT hardware probably crosses over a little bit. Some healthcare crosses over, consumer goods crosses over. So in other words, if you could really peel all this apart and say what software, it's probably 65% of this total. I mean, of all VC, right? So if you're not in software, you're in medical and energy or so on, you just got to understand you're playing a much smaller part of the VC pool than not. And that's just the way it is. So what I really focus on, because of the work we do, is how are companies doing at the early stage raising money? How many deals are getting done? How are investors valuing those companies? And then how large are the investment rounds? Those are the three basic questions. So what you can see here is I kind of made the statement that in seed rounds, you're going to go VC, meaning not angels. You can see that here. I mean, the dark part of the stack here is angel funding. And it was a more meaningful part of the total for sure 10 years ago. And now, I mean, no offense to angels, it's a pretty insignificant part of it. And the challenge I've got with angel groups right now is let's just say, you all are representative of one company, you're the founders, you came and pitched our fund. if we like what you're doing, and you're not pre-seed, you're not super early, we're probably going to write a check for 500 or 750 to you as part of a bigger round. You went through diligence with one group and we're going to lead it, meaning we're going to go out and find the rest of the money with you. Certainly it's not our responsibility totally as investors, but we're going to go out, we're going to direct email every fund we know that invests in companies like yours and do the hard work of getting that, next 500 or 750, whatever's open. That's hard for angel groups to do. They do syndicate. That's called syndicating. It just means finding other money. But their average or median check size, I always say average, is 250,000. Look at, seed deals are in the millions now. So I think there's a bit of a mismatch right now with round sizes getting so big and angel groups. Hey, these are individuals. These are people, there's not a fund. An individual may not be able to write more than a $10,000 or $15,000 check at any one given time. And so angels are critical to the ecosystem, but have been marginalized a bit by funds like ours, meaning we call it micro VC, because we can write one check that's maybe 3 times the size of a median angel investment. So that's just kind of the trend line there in terms of VC. And then lastly, this is quite interesting, is what's pretty staggering about this chart is to look at the yellow and orange, if that's showing up over here pretty well. Let me see. Yeah. Look at this part of the stack. These are early rounds of funding, over 25 million. Oh yeah, or more. This is early funding. This is not, late stage funding. So VC data is broken up into early, mid, and late. This is not mid and late, guys. That is a crazy number. And then followed right behind by $10 to $25 million deals. So, all this says is that for whatever reason, companies are raising a lot more money these days than not. And guess what? To get into a round of 25 million, we're irrelevant. Don't go pitch a fund that's less than 50 million. They couldn't even do it. And so it just gives you some insight into the math, sort of the math and what's happening from an investment perspective behind the scenes. So let me stop there. And the point of this data, and sorry, I tricked you guys, I forgot I pulled this together last night. I was like, oh, we should show some data, that'd be fun. Is that, guess what? I get an email every single day on every company that was funded in the Midwest and Mountain States. I look at this every single morning, and it's sometimes not disclosed. How big was the round? Do we know what the pre-money valuation is? Meaning, what's the value of the company when the investors came in? Where is this business? What are they doing? So when you come and pitch, and I'm not an expert by any stretch of imagination, I'm really new in this business, just doing it, 5 years. Folks have been in this business for a decade or more. Holy cow, their knowledge bank is gigantic, and yours is about zero. And not in a critical way. This isn't your industry. I mean, it's not, but you need to go out and educate yourself. So how do you do that? You go to the National Venture Capital Association, ncva.org, and you sign up for the Venture Monitor. It's free. And I get a little bit better data because we pay for this service, but PitchBook provides all the data to the National Venture Capital Association, and the Venture Monitor is free. And you get all this great information, round size, pre-money valuations. You don't get good data on geography because there's a big difference in valuation between the middle of the country and the coast, but you don't get that. But all this I'm showing you by and large is in the Venture Monitor, and you can access it for free.
What do you say that underlying themes does well? Yesterday's, but I mean, when you look, this is indicative of market consolidation, but what is that? What is that trend or what's underlying that?
I think there's a lot of things, but so here's the data I wish we had. I wish we could pull apart the country and take Washington State and California into their own data set, take New York into one data set, Boston into one data set, in the DC area, and then look at everything else. I think you're going to see a very different picture. So this is being driven bi-coastal communities by and large. And to some extent, Austin, I don't mean to leave them out, but I mean, Austin is still an emerging ecosystem compared with the big guys. Yeah, I mean, I know this data because it's crazy, but there's about 80,000 tech people in Austin, which is great. But the DC area is 200,000. Give you, I mean, order of magnitude is double. So that's not widely understood. And then, California makes up half of all US tech employment. Critically important for this country that California keeps going. They have some real challenges right now, to say the least. But I don't know international data. Yeah. This is the data we get. This is published for the US. Okay, so any questions on the process of raising money, kind of who the investors are? I didn't go too deep on any of the, one topic, but and a little bit of data on sort of what's the environment you're in when you're out looking for VC. Hopefully I kind of answered those questions reasonably well. But happy to take any other, any more detailed questions you may have. And you will get these slides, by the way. So whenever that happens, next day or two. Easier said than done. So let's take a reasonably big company. I mean, lower middle market is $5 billion in sales, meaning a pretty good sized business. That size company, they're very open to acquiring generally new technologies. Large companies is large companies. So I think the question is more, who are you relevant to? Because I think it will be very, very hard in my estimation of sort of jumping. I mean, let's say in tech, I mean, wouldn't every tech company love to sell to Microsoft, Google, Amazon, a couple, name the big tech. Okay, this is really, really hard. I mean, very established companies with revenue, really clear product, value proposition. I mean, you've got to have all that and be very well funded. So it seems to me you have to take those steps to be relevant, certainly the big guys, and you got to take a couple of those steps to be relevant in the lower middle market. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is called build or buy. So build or buy. So we were talking company earlier today, actually, and they discovered that a large company was trying to build something and failed at it, and it was much better in their context to partner with them because they're building it, and it's like bigger companies just for 3 years in, they're not hitting it. That's a buy decision. So the ones you have to watch out for are the companies building things who are open to talking with all kinds of companies, especially up and comers, to learn about what you're doing. It's not illegal. It's borderline unethical, too unethical, depending on how they do it. That's what you got to be a little more conscious of. Yes, they can. Yeah, and that's a whole nother, pathway is patents. The reality is for most younger companies, even with strong IP, you can't defend it. It costs too much money. You can't afford the attorneys. You're fighting a big company. They practically have unlimited resources. And that may be part of their strategy, frankly, is like, hey, let's just string this thing along. We're never intending to go to court. We're just going to keep flooding the court with paperwork and delay your pain as a startup. Luckily, that doesn't happen as much as you'd think it would. But, when we invest in companies that have what we perceive from our diligence standpoint, not what the company says, to have strong IP portfolios, that just creates a barrier in the short term. It's not insurmountable. Any IP you can work around ultimately at the end of the day with enough creativity and money. Unless you have like just base foundational patents, which are pretty tough to get. So, you got to kind of recognize that, certain IPs slow people down, let's put it that way. Certainly can exclude people from markets, but if you're really getting a fight with the big guys on this, you're not likely to win because it's astronomical lawyer fees, to fight these things. And so that's just reality as a startup. That should not deter you from working to create valuable IP, by the way. It's just don't put too much stock in it that this is going to protect what I'm doing on a forever basis. That's just not the way you got to think about it.
They would, even similar to the website. They got to get the source code and patent it or something. I would agree, you're kind of wasting your time a little bit because the big guys are just going to look at it and they're going to have their 1,000 developers working behind it. Hey, you see that good idea?
Or they were already working on it too, right? And just, hey, seen a couple of startups in space, like, boy, we better get after it now. This is skunk works. We were doing something and imperative, we jump on it now. That happens quite often. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. Thanks a ton for being here. Hopefully this was helpful. Again, you'll get the slides and, hopefully you picked up a couple of useful things today. That's always my goal. If you can say, hey, learn one or two things, good. Mission accomplished on my end. Okay, good. Or more.